Mark Len, and I want to welcome you to the Remote Workplace series. Today we'll be discussing how to leverage the remote workplace to survive during COVID-19 and then thrive with our special guests, Tim Lake and Len Noble. Tim Lake is the Operations Director, Central Europe for Cisco, and provides solutions to the public sector. Len Noble is Executive Sales Director for Netsync and covers both enterprise and public sectors. He spent 14 plus years previously with Cisco. Welcome, Tim and Len.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, we find ourselves in the middle of some interesting times with COVID-19. And given the rapid rise of the remote workplace caught many by surprise, it has really been an interesting 2 months so far, which leads me into my first question. Are organizations learning on the fly on how to implement and scale the remote workplace during this outbreak? Or is it more of just getting in place and we'll fortify it later?
You know, I really think it's both. I mean, I hate to say yes to both of your questions, but they really are learning on the fly as well as just trying to get something into place. You had schools that never thought they were going to have to handle this. You have offices that never thought they were going to have to handle this at this scale, only having a few workers work from home, while today they need everyone to work from home. So it's really a little bit of both. They need to get something in place, but then they have to figure out how they do this at scale long term. I mean, the Wall Street Journal just put something in that cited the census saying that only 5% of the workforce worked from home back in 2018, and now we're trying to get, you know, darn near everyone in an office. It's a big change for these companies.
Yeah, Mark, I would just add on what Tim was saying. For me, or from my perspective, I think it's been all over the board. Obviously, COVID-19 drove a huge demand. I think some people or some organizations were utilizing remote work strategies maybe on a small scale, and others are actually scrambling now to try to create a strategy or create something that their remote workers could use during this time. So I think it's been all over the board. I think now, though, that's going to change. I think obviously initially it was probably more of a reactionary type thing, but I think now they're going to have to step back and figure out long term what that strategic approach looks like and how to build that solution set to support the remote workers. So yeah, we've seen a variation of responses from COVID-19 and how people are approaching the remote workplace.
Both of you mentioned something that kind of you bring them together and you can kind of see why there was a big issue, right? Rush and planning, or in the lack thereof of planning. And, you know, given this rush, what challenges to the remote workplace have you concerned? Is it adoption? Is it collaboration? And what do you do about isolation?
You know, the first thing for me is it's the technology. We can figure it out. So, you know, VPNs are overrun. You know, you need to secure your video conferencing platform. We can do all those things with split tunneling, you know, securing the video experience. What is really top of mind for me and my organization, and indeed all of Cisco, is our employees' experience, and how do we lead in times like this where people are isolated at home, or maybe they're not isolated as much as they're used to being, where you've got kids, dogs, all coming onto the screen. And I will tell you, we've set the tone, and we've said it flat out that on business conferencing calls now, we need to recognize that kids are going to come in unexpectedly, dogs are going to jump up, the doorbell's going to ring, and that's just okay right now. We're going to work through that. We're being productive, and that people have other demands on them. So for me, it's really more thinking about the social aspect of this, of all these employees that are grappling with how to get their job done remotely, but also these personal situations that are taxing them, like having to educate their students, having to, you know, have their significant others at home when they may not be used to that, or those that are by themselves feeling like the workday, you know, never ends. It goes 24/7, and some of the issues of being alone. So we've really focused on the personal nature of what this is doing when we send all these people home.
It's funny when you mentioned that at the very start of our video session, we had some jitter. We're not going to edit that out, you know, kind of going what you just talked about.
Yeah, you know, it's the new way. We've got to get the job done, and it's not going to be perfect. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have, you know, a bunch of lights stacked off screen here to make me look palatable for your viewing audience. And I did put on a blazer today for this. I'm still obviously in shorts and barefoot other than that, but it's just a completely different way of working.
Well, I'm sure they appreciate parts of that.
Hey, I love the candidness, Tim. That's awesome. Just to give some feedback in reference to the question itself, for me, I immediately think about the remote workers, similar to what Tim was saying. I mean, the tools have to be functional. At some point, they have to be easy to consume by the end user. I think at the end of the day, we have to be able to, I guess, recognize whether or not they can maintain either similar or improved productivity. So I think it's a change. And Tim mentioned the psychology piece of it too. I think we probably don't give enough credence to how important in our day-to-day lives our work interactions with others are. So I think that continuous engagement is very, very relevant in reference to, keeping people sane while they're working out of the house all day long. I mean, even for me, just to be very transparent, I have to get up and walk outside. If I sit in the office for 2 or 3 hours and I'm just working and have no other engagement, it drives me crazy. So I think understanding the people piece of it, which Tim mentioned, building out the technology side of it, making sure it scales and it's secure and functional for the end users. I'll give a quick example in the schools, and I'll use my wife and daughter as an example, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I will say this: our district has done a great job in reference to ramping this thing up. But early on in the process, it was a struggle. I literally could hear my wife screaming in the background because she was feeling the pressure of trying to get my 9-year-old into a meeting, and she didn't understand the technology. And I think we got to think about the teachers from an education perspective. They were the ones that were relaying the information, telling the parents where to go, what to access, how to do it. Well, I saw the first email go out to the parents. Very little information as far as where to go, no hyperlinks for access, no information around the student passwords or login information. So I think there's so many small variables to this thing that we have to take in consideration. But if we get those pieces correct that Tim mentioned, the technologies, make it easy for people to consume and not forget the people aspect of it, and it's a secure world for everybody to operate in, I think we can be successful. And I've seen that improve through my wife and daughter over the last several weeks. So it's been fun to actually watch them consume the technology and get better and better and become more comfortable with it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Lynn. You hear a lot of stories out there about what people are doing, like Austin putting the Wi-Fi on the buses to try to help those out that don't have Wi-Fi at home. And we're starting to, initially we heard all the bad stories just because of the sheer scale and speed, right, of which COVID-19 impacted both the U.S. as well as the world. And now you're starting to hear some of those good stories. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Are there some organizations getting it right out there, given the speed and the impact that COVID-19's had on the world?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot getting it right. You mentioned that it seems like we go to the negative because this is really tough, but those school districts that never thought they were going to have to send every student home and have everyone teach without that brick and mortar, they're coming up with some really compelling solutions, both leveraging our technology. We've given out WebEx for free to anyone who needs it, including these schools, and they can integrate it and make it secure so that those lessons remain private. But these teachers across a lot of these districts are doing quite well as these larger institutions that are having to build out infrastructure that no one thought they would need. So when you send home an entire state of employees, that VPN infrastructure that was there, that remote working infrastructure was there, wasn't designed to support that, and it's really stretching it. They're having to pull gear in that they had decommissioned. They're having to get creative around, not to get too technical, but split tunneling and doing some other things that allow them to do it. So I would say there's really a lot more good than bad out there. And what's really great is we're all growing very quickly. So we're going to be a lot more flexible when all of this is over around how we work, how we educate, how we play, and how we learn. So I think there's a lot of good from a growth perspective that can come out of this. The other thing that leads me to is the incredible tax on internet. We've always taken, I would say at home, for Netflix and all that, your internet, you've taken that for granted that it will always be there and relatively reliable if the kids aren't on the Wi-Fi too much. But what we're seeing is for a lot of states, their infrastructure is taxed. They're having to get creative around how to expand that to make it reliable. And then in Europe, you're seeing, people like Netflix having to lower their streaming values because there is such a tax on infrastructure. So this is where our teams have been working day and night with a lot of these service providers, governments, and whatnot to try to increase this infrastructure. So it's really been impressive to see what people do in times of crisis.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lynn, please.
No, I was just going to say, I would add to Tim's point, to several of Tim's points. I think what I've seen is people pulling together and doing a phenomenal job with dealing with the situation based on where they're at, right? We mentioned earlier that different groups, different organizations had different platforms for remote learning. They had different strategies around how to support it. Tim talked about the scalability issues associated with it. And we've seen the K-12 entities, and they're all in different places in reference to what those strategies look like when it comes to education. I think the thing that I think about moving forward is, as long as we go about it the right way, the right technologies, the right training, the right preparation, I think we can all be successful. I think some of the things that we do got to consider is that there, in some cases, is an equity issue from a connectivity standpoint. And Tim mentioned that people are getting very creative when they're providing solutions to help people engage, make sure they're continuing that education regardless of socioeconomic status or where they may be located. I think those are the things that I'm excited to see. Not that this virus has been fun for any of us, but at the end of the day, if it drives us to bring in equity for connectivity purposes and helping everyone have equal opportunity when it comes to education and continuous learning, I'll be happy to see that as it continues to happen and continue to grow and mature, because I think it's something very well needed in all communities.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Len, into my next question, which I think a lot of people are wanting to hear about, especially from thought leaders, manufacturers, and those that spend a lot of time, thinking about this and putting things into place for organizations all around the globe. And that is, how do you think this sudden reliance on the remote workplace and learning will affect what it looks like further out? The future of work and the future of learning is what we're seeing now the new norm? Or is Mark Cuban right? There's going to be a lot of innovation, and we're going to see other companies come out to complement what's already being done out there, as well as the companies that have these platforms, much like WebEx that we're using today. We've seen WebEx and is there going to be compliance? I know that's kind of a long question, but there's a lot of pieces to that, and there's a lot of people out there would love to hear about this.
Even be more productive if possible. So I think those are things we're going to be looking at, but I think people are going to be more cautious just in general moving forward. And I think this is going to drive organizations, whether it be in the enterprise sector, the education sector, to build strategic plans around business continuity. I think at the same time, that's going to bring innovation, because I think that's going to be funded through a lot of the government stimulus packages that are going to be out there. So I think you're going to see innovation from a technology standpoint and how that supports the efforts around education and remote work in the enterprise space. So yes, definitely think things are changing as we move forward.
And I think to your question about innovation, Mark, it is absolutely going to drive a lot of innovation. I mean, we've added features to WebEx as an example, so you can broadcast a meeting, let's say a city council meeting, live on YouTube very easily, or LinkedIn, or where have you. So you can have that secure content, but broadcast it out to citizens. But it's going to create, whole new companies, grow other companies, companies that will compete with Cisco, that will be acquired by Cisco, or that will have nothing to do with us. But there's no doubt it'll drive innovation. And I think from an office perspective, you just take that experience of having to drive into an office. The traffic here in Austin, Texas is renowned for taking a long time to get a little distance. Is it really necessary to do that? I don't think we want to give up an office altogether, but to have landing spots or those moments that matter where we can bring teams together in person, I think there'll be a place for the office, but you're going to see a huge shift in the flexibility of how people work. And not to get on a soapbox, but maybe we'll be a kinder, gentler workforce in terms of allowing people and hopefully companies are already doing this, but where people can provide more of that work-life integration, where they can make that soccer game or go take on that piece that's important to them, and we're more focused on the outcomes that our employees are providing in terms of results, rather than just being present physically at a desk for time. That also means that, as leaders and managers, we need to check in with our people quite regularly. We can't rely on them being right outside of a door or, being Big Brother, but checking in way regularly and leveraging some of these digital tools to do that.
When you said that just a minute ago, all I could think about is I've spent many hours on Mopac and 35 down in Austin and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a great place to take a conference call, though. Hands-free Bluetooth, by the way.
I think Mark, I think the productivity thing is exciting. I think Tim brings up a great point around the difference, though, when you may make that shift from the office to the remote work type solutions, and that we still do have to stay connected to our employees. It's going to be important that we have regular communication, that we continue to recognize their efforts and the things that they achieve. I think sometimes we can become a little isolated. So I think if we take the proper measures to make sure we're still recognizing, still engaging, I think there could be some ballast there that Tim mentioned when it comes to being able to maybe spend more time with the families or be at games of your kids, so those types of things. So I think there's some benefits from both perspectives. As long as there's a balance there, I think it can work well.
Well, interestingly enough, the two of you have led me into the line perfectly. And it's a two-part question because it is one of a lot of importance and top of a lot of people's minds. Do you think organizations can attract a more productive and happier workforce by offering, further work at home opportunities? And the second part of that question is, how are organizations going to manage that? Are they going to use policies? What if somebody gets hurt on a conference call in their home? What if their Wi-Fi is not secured? It breaks in and causes a huge breach and economic impact to shareholders. So that's the two-part question.
So it absolutely is a competitive advantage today for people to allow work from home and flexible working environments. The concern I have is that now everyone knows about it. So it's always been a competitive advantage for us and a lot of companies where once someone realizes that if they're empowered, entrepreneurial, and that's what they like, then they're going to want that. And if you're a company that gives that to them, you can recruit that talent much easier because we all come to work for a paycheck, but there's more to it than that. And I'm thinking of specific examples where people have stayed at a company or come to a company because of the flexible work environment. Now, some people still want that option to go into an office. They feel there's too much distraction in their home, and they want to go do that. And I would say, not to be too flippant about it, but those concerns around in most industries, I don't want to speak across every industry, but being injured at home, home security, some of those things, they've been addressed. And so it's not new. This is new for a lot of companies, but for a lot of companies, this is old hat, and people don't need to reinvent the wheel. So for example, as we're sending, I don't care if we're sending 30,000 students home or 1,000 workers home, and we didn't plan for those devices to be in the home environment. So you mentioned, their Wi-Fi isn't secure. What are we doing so that even if they have the least secure Wi-Fi in the neighborhood, that the company's data is protected, that the sorts of filtering that would happen if a student was on campus with their device are still happening, and we can do all that in the cloud today. Cisco does all that, other companies do all that. That is not, like I said, the technology side of this is rather straightforward, and we've done this for years. It is not leading edge at this point. It's more the cultural side.
Yeah, I think to your question, Mark, it's been debated a long time, and I think people have different opinions. Obviously, I've seen studies out there that talk about, people are much more productive at home. But I think it comes down to the individual, and I think in a leadership role, that's something you're going to have to understand. I think some people self-manage well. I think they have the ability to create boundaries in their home environment. I can tell you for me, and I'll just use myself as an example, when I'm in the office, I'm less productive. I can say that without a fact because there's a lot of people, a lot of distractions, and sometimes it can become a social gathering. But the same thing can be said of when you're at the house because you got family, you got your wife, your kids, and those types of things. So if you allow that to be a distraction, then again, you can be less productive. So for me, it's knowing the individual, knowing yourself, being able to self-manage and make those decisions to function where you can be the most productive. So I think that's possible. I think at the end of the day, the technology, like was mentioned earlier, is there. So there's no issues there. I think from a security and a policy standpoint, you can help put things in place to keep people safe, to keep people secure, and build the right technical infrastructure to support those needs. At the end of the day, again, it goes back to me, is understanding your employees, understanding the technology necessary to be able to deliver these types of solutions and making sure people are productive, and then the human element of making sure that we're all connected on a regular basis and recognizing the efforts of the individuals within the organization. So obviously, I think I'm a big proponent of it, but I think it's shifting your mindset in some cases to understand how people work, what's best for them, and what environment they work the best in. I'll put it that way. So.
Well, I think it's also really forcing the issue that we need to empower our workforce and allow them to be entrepreneurial. I think this is if you were a manager who needed to be on top of your people day in and day out, this is probably not a good situation. But if you can empower your team to kind of accomplish what they need to, this is a great situation. It's providing a lot of growth. In fact, this is detailed greatly in a book called Team of Teams. And everyone thinks it's around working in large organizations, complex organizations, but it's really an indictment on this reductive style of management and more about the positives that come out of empowering your workforce to make the right decisions for themselves and your company.
That's correct. Yeah, that's really great. Do either of you have a prediction for the percentage of people that will be working from home on average in most organizations a year from today?
Do you have any insight what that number is currently prior to COVID-19, Mark? Any idea?
Well, I think Tim said at the start it was 20%. Is that 18%? Is that right, Tim?
No, I believe it was a little over 5% during the 2018 census. The Wall Street Journal just had an article about that. So that's the entire workforce. So you have people that simply that can't work from home, and all the people that are keeping literally the trains on time that are out there that can't work from home. But if you take an office that was stereotypically, maybe you only had 10% of the workforce working from home, or you can only go on Fridays, I bet you that goes from that 5 or 10% to 30% to a half. I mean, this is one of those things where people have gotten a taste for this, and if they like it, there's no going back. It's you can give something, but taking it away is a much bigger deal. And to your point, hopefully the economy rebounds. But at the point where the workforce becomes constricted, like it was or is. Currently, you're going to have to fight for the great talent, and if that great talent wants to work flexibly and give you great results, but in a way that works for their personal life, you're going to have to go there to get that talent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's going to be a cultural shift for a lot of organizations, which I think at the end of the day, that's a great point. If people are productive and maybe even more productive, and they've earned that right, and now they've been living in it for the last 30, 45 days. I think it's going to be hard to turn that back. But I think good people, you can let them, as Tim used the word empowerment, you can empower them to do the things they need to do to be successful. And I think if you do those things, you're going to create a happier employee. And I think then in those cases, they are that much more productive.
Now, but as soon as it's safe, that number of remote workers is going to go to 0% because everyone's going to want to get the heck out of their house. So 100% full at the offices for just a few weeks as everyone's like, I love you, honey, but I got to go. So the offices is full once it's safe.
Tim, we're going to see a decline, and then it'll spike back up after everybody goes and gets a little something. Right? I love it.
I didn't necessarily mean that question to be a zinger, but we live in a pop culture, soundbite driven, analytics driven world, and people love percentages. They love to hear that, and it's great when you get thought leaders and experts like the two of you on. And I'm sure the audience will really love that part. And I really appreciate it. There's been some great insights today, and Tim and Lynn, I really want to thank you both. I think the audience is going to be able to glean a lot out of this about how to leverage the remote workplace and thrive. Thank you.